there are really three things you can do to drive growth, right? There's better acquisition, there's better retention, and there's better monetization. And when we do a study, and this was kind of the thinking behind Price Intelligently initially, when we did a study of those three, and if you incremented each one of them by 1%, what was the effect on your core business?
Yeah.
Acquisition made about 3% difference, 1% increase. Retention made about 9% difference. Monetization made about 15 or 16% difference to your growth in revenue. So it was the lever that was largely unpulled, but had outsized impact because it affects all of your current customers as well as every single one you go to acquire in the future.
From the current company motions that we have in the markets, the most unoptimized one is what you said, is monetization, then we have retention, then we have an acquisition.
So all of us will have people full-time paid doing sales work. All of us will have people full-time paid doing retention work. So few companies have someone who's got the job of actually doing anything to do with pricing. It probably sits with a PMM who's maybe not done it before, and they're coming up with a bunch of competitor analysis in order to try and raise something. Because it's tough. We don't want to piss people off. We don't want to get it wrong. It has outsized impacts. And the other thing we see in our data that's so interesting here, and I love this, is those that make quarterly changes have 82% higher ARPU growth relative to those who haven't touched it in a year. So that's not even whether it's a good change or not. It's just being committed to change. So if you change things regularly, then you learn and then you can get things right. It's just being willing to make that first step.
Get ready for the Product Tea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm very excited to introduce our next guest, the marketing wizard, revolutionizing the payments infrastructure, the CMO at Paddle, fresh from SaaStock. From skyrocketing Optimizely's growth to co-founding EDO and changing the game in B2B personalization, he has done it all. Oh, and did we mention he advises startups when he's bored on a Tuesday? There is even more. He's also on the board of 90, a social enterprise consultancy, because who says you cannot change the world and fight global poverty while rocking the corporate world? Which is funny because his career goal is to always be the dumbest person in the room, always to be on the side of the disruptor, and always to encourage, serve, and value those around him. Let's give it up for the startup lover, the CMO, and all-around cool guy, Andrew Davies. Andrew, it is so nice to see you this morning. How are you doing?
I don't know whether to wince or laugh, but yes, I'm good, thank you, especially after that introduction.
I'm very glad that you like it. How would you rate it on a scale from 1 to outbound super hot leads?
It's definitely getting my super score as a hot MQL coming inbound.
That sounds really good. Can you introduce yourself in your own words to the peasants that may not know you?
Hey, well, anyone who doesn't know me, I'd love to get to know you. I love meeting new people. My name's Andrew. I serve Paddle as Chief Marketing Officer, have done for the last 2 years. And before that, I built a personalization business, a software business as co-founder. We raised money, made loads of mistakes, every mistake in the book, and finally exited it in 2019. We joined then an Insight Ventures-backed scale-up, bought a bunch of other companies. So suddenly I ended up running global marketing for Optimizely as part of those acquisitions. And it's been a real ride since I joined Paddle. We've had loads of fun. It's now a business that has about 300 people, and we build the complete payments infrastructure for product-led companies globally. And I'm sure we'll dive into some of our research around how product-led companies can grow. And that's really what I love doing. I love helping SaaS founders grow faster, better, safer.
That is really cool. And I just want to mention that at this point, I'm not paid for this as well, right? But I'm going to shill a little bit for Paddle now. I've never worked in a company that had Paddle as a payment provider, but I worked with a lot of payment providers over the years on all kinds of scales that you could imagine. And they almost all of them sucked. And then when I started to actually advise product-led companies, we came across of a couple of them that are now also with you, and only the best to report. And yeah, it's actually, I think someone else, a former CGO said that they have shit that actually works. It is pretty cool. And I love working with them. So take it for what you will. But I think it's a really cool brand and company. And yeah, you seem to be doing something right. Not just from the marketing side, maybe, but yeah, it seems to be good. So Andrew, I ask this question, everyone. What do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think we're stewards of our reputation, right? So if people get things wrong about me, that's my fault. So actually, there's two things that I get annoyed that people get right about me. One of them is that I'm too nice. So I have a reputation for being too nice. And I think the negative side of that is that you can have a reputation for not being willing to make the hard decisions or give hard feedback fast. And I think that's probably something I've struggled with in my career, because I always want to give feedback well. I always want to think about the other person in lots of detail and land it well. And so that's definitely one of those things that I'm challenged with, that people perhaps I wish they got wrong about me, but they get right about me. And then also, I just think that you mentioned I like being the dumbest person in the room. I really do. And I think one thing that people get wrong about me is because we get to drop loads of data. We see inside 36 billion of ARR through our metrics product. We get to drop loads of data in lots of different conversations. I'm sure we'll talk about it today. The problem of that is that people assume you're smart. And all I'm doing is working on the back of the data we've got and the teams that are laying that up for me. So those are two things that come to mind.
That's really cool. So I like that you said that it's kind of our problem if people get something wrong about us. I didn't really think about it in this way. I always tried to shift the blame to others. And yeah, let's see whether I can challenge you of being the dumbest person in the room. I mean, we have a 50-50 chance today. So let's see who's the dumber person at the end. But yeah, I'm especially excited to talk to you today. First of all, not only because of Paddle, but also I really admire you for your very candid takes, and you're straight to the point, and you're very much also in the area that I love speaking about, like product-led growth. We all love payments because that usually means revenues coming in. Mm-hmm. And yeah, let's just start with that. I know that you've been at SaaStock. I think you had a great time. You're not jet lagged for some reason. But yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. I think I'm going to name this episode Monetization Growth for PLG, which is a very broad topic. What were some of the key points that you took? And maybe also in regards to the SaaS benchmark that you did with OpenView. What is going on in the world right now?
There's a lot going on, isn't there? I think it's useful actually to go back 12, 18 months to recognize the challenge that we are going through from a more macro perspective before we dive into what's happening right now. And as I mentioned, we see behind actually about 34,000 subscription businesses in our data set. So one of the things we were doing at SaaStock was showing that data. And it's really interesting. So we see real-time data on upgrades, retention, downgrades. And we see the tailwinds of COVID as many software companies grew. We also see the zero interest rate phenomenon crashing, and therefore capital evacuation and companies not being able to grow as fast. We see the kind of weekend blip in Silicon Valley Bank where everybody around the world said, oh shit, something's gone wrong. This might be the end of us, because so many companies had their money in Silicon Valley Bank. And we've seen multiple churn events in B2C and in B2B as people have cleaned up all of the SaaS companies they've been using, all of their massive vendor spend, and consolidated it, multiple times as we've gone through different planning cycles. So we're in an age right now where growth across the board in our base is down at about 8 or 9%. That's spread across a huge corpus of companies. So there are loads of companies that are growing much faster than that. We can talk about those in a minute. But that's down from 20, 30, 40% across the average base of growth before. That includes loads of bootstrappers who don't have capital. So that's why it's weighted lower than those who would have capital. And so in that world, what we're doing is trying to help businesses be those outliers. And so, yes, at SaaStock, I love that room at SaaStock because it's one of the best rooms in the world for us, because we serve international PLG. People are from small domestic economies serving the global audience. And you just bump into people from Kyiv and people from Bratislava, people from Sydney that have flown over, people from Wellington in New Zealand. So it's a great gathering of that crowd as we start to discuss how you can be an outlier when it comes to growth.
That is really interesting. Let me just ask you one question for this. So you're looking also at your data in terms of like what's going through you, and you try to also make conclusions about retention and churn and so forth. So I find this very interesting. Like, how does this influence anything at Paddle? And how does this actually go into your business? Because if you usually think about a payment provider, what you think about is like, okay, like they just charge us a specific percentage and that's it. And they're not really innovating in any way. How does this change the story at Paddle?
It's one of the reasons I joined the business, because of access to this data. So our core billing platform processes about 1 billion a year, and so serves several thousand customers doing that. And so for them, we see absolutely everything. And then we've got this free metrics product that we acquired from Profitwell, which people connect any other billing stack to. So there'll be loads of Stripe and Recurly and Chargebee and Adyen and others there. And that's the one which we see this 34,000 businesses. So the first one, well, that's all about our customers and how we can help them grow faster. We charge a percentage, as you said. Therefore, anything you can do to help them grow better returns back to us straight away. So there's really strong alignment there. And then the metrics data set, really there are 3 things we're doing there. Number one, it's making sure there's a really easy, free entry into the Paddle ecosystem. So something that gives value immediately, that people can benefit from immediately. Number 2, it's about giving us the signals in order to show people where there's threats and where there's opportunities, and they could go and buy one of our products where we actually monetize. Now, the third thing is, which comes to your point a little bit, is that we see that as just a real privileged view on the SaaS ecosystem that we can use to educate our team, our strategy, but also the wider market. So behind the scenes, there's this concept of being the Bloomberg for SaaS. That we have this data set that's pretty unique and pretty compelling, and we publish episodic video around it. Every month we publish a SaaS benchmarks report. We've just mixed it up with OpenView's survey to get better data, our real-time data with their survey data. And over the next year, I want to do more and more of moving towards that Bloomberg of SaaS.
I love this terminology because I used it as well a year ago when I was at Ajua. I said, like, we want to create the Bloomberg of weather.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's like...
Yep. Common aspiration.
Bloomberg. Yeah, Bloomberg of everything. It's just like, become the information hub. So when you think about it in this way, like, how does what happens to you as a PLG business in some way, as well as a payment provider, how does this mirror up with what you see also in the statistics, like on how the industry is changing? Like, how does this reflect now also on you as a company? So you said you have a free onboarding version. You have something, you really focus on activating customers early. You give them value fast. You have a very, very transparent pricing as well, which I quite appreciate. Where are there parallels there?
So there's a few parallels. If we just take the different products, we've got 4 products: a free metrics product, a consulting firm that does pricing. We can talk about some of their data. And so that's quite expensive. It's based on sprints. It's a consulting model. A retention product that's pay per performance for reducing churn, and then the core paddle billing platform. So paddle billing has a kind of a self-serve option as well, as does metrics. We've got 2 free self-serve metrics to get into the product. And honestly, on the paddle billing side, we haven't been very good at self-serve historically. Because it's a financial tool, we need to do a whole bunch of KYB, KYC, domain checks. We have to make sure we're not processing payments on behalf of people who are outside of our risk profile. So that's been clunky as anything. Honestly, there, if you went and did a kind of a view of our self-serve 6 months ago, you would probably firebomb my house. It was so bad. Like someone who talks to PLG businesses, and yet we just made so many mistakes, and that was fine. But we had lots of locks on the front door because of previous pain of onboarding customers that are outside our risk profile. And so we have to maintain a very strong risk posture, and we're getting better month on month. And every month, hundreds of businesses come on board, self-serve, use our developer documentation, and transact their first dollar revenue with Paddle, which is really exciting. So we're learning, we're students of PLG methodology in terms of how to make it frictionless, as much as we are helping people do that on the payment side of things.
So this is quite interesting because in order to determine the correct price point, which is like the main topic as well, if you talk about pricing in some ways, right? And you're part of this, like in this entire story, in order to get to the discussion of, so how much should we charge for a product? You also need to know, like, okay, how good is your product and how is the onboarding? You need to have a lot of stuff figured out before you even talk about monetization. And how should we think about, I don't want to say that Paddle has an uninteresting product, but like for a product that is this dry, right? Like nobody wants to deal with payment. Nobody is enjoying this as in scale up specifically, right? Because it starts to become annoying. Like I also remember that we started to deal with chargeback rate. Like if you have as many transactions as we had every month, we had, I don't remember exactly, I think we had a couple of 100,000 every month. At some point you become, you get to a stage where if the cancellations or the chargebacks are starting to become too big, then you start to get in trouble with MasterCard because then they give you fees and so forth. So it starts to impact the product as well. And how do you as a provider or like in general think about this in the way of like, how do we get pricing right from the perspective of a company that would profit from if you actually charge more?
Great question. So firstly, let's talk about our pricing and our learning there. So we are transparent on our pricing. It's kind of 5% of 50 cents. There are many people who aren't in our market. Now, that's a lot more than a basic payment processor if you went to Stripe. But that's because we do a whole bunch of other stuff, like solving tax compliance, sale tax compliance globally, doing all the subscription management. So our analysis says that when you get to about 10 million of ARR as a PLG business, if you're selling into different territories, when you count up all your finance people, technical people, the subscription management stack, the different payment processors, it probably costs 8 or 9% of your ARR. And so our first challenge in our own pricing is that we're pricing for something that at the early stage is a future problem for the SaaS founder that comes to work for us. It's a champagne problem. It's only when they're selling a few million of ARR to different territories that our price point makes sense. So that's a challenge we have to work with. And so we've just come to a happy medium there where we feel really confident that we're now better at telling the story of the future challenge and the future pain, that the status quo gets worse for the companies that don't choose us, and therefore we can stick at that price point. Your question, though, on more general pricing philosophy is so interesting to me because your comment there was, if we raise prices, it benefits us. Now, I think that can be true, but we see behind hundreds and hundreds of pricing projects every year through our team, Price Intelligently. And what we do see there is a few very strong correlations between strategy and growth. The first one is, do people really understand their value metric? Now, a value metric is the unit of exchange by which you charge. And what you want to do is find a value metric, so that is number of seats, number of gigabytes, number of minutes, whatever it might be. You need to find something where when you provide more value, there is a higher willingness to pay for that value. So quick story, last month we were doing a project for a call center company and they were charging on a seat basis. And we did a willingness to pay study and it showed that as seats went up, the willingness to pay didn't move at all. So that's an awful value metric because if the call center doubles in size, you get zero more willingness to pay. Whereas number of tickets or number of tickets resolved had a direct correlation between the value you provided and the price. So the first learning there is you've got to find your value metric. And PLG do this really well. So in our latest survey, 60% of PLG businesses identify and think about a value metric, whereas sales-led businesses is about 20% think about value metrics. So that's the first thing. There's a couple of others we can dive into, but I'll stop there for a second.
I love that. I really love that. So let me I want to touch on two things and let's hope we don't lose the thread on this because I find this very fascinating. So the first one is when we think about PLG or like classical business performance, we usually report in different ways. We say like, okay, we have a self-serve funnel. So like this is where the small customers are coming in and we have sales-led. This is where the big stuff is happening. And then we separate it on the balance sheets and then we think that they're never going to intersect with each other. Now, if we have to, like you're also working a lot with companies that are also starting to grow with time. And I really loved what you just said because I want to double click on this really quickly. So if you are an early stage company, or you're selling to early stage companies with your product, the earlier the company is, the more it is about convenience and less about cost efficiency or like unit efficiency at scale. So what you said is, we need to have easy onboarding for the smaller customers. It needs to make sense. They need to get quick, right? And so forth. As this company grows, what you call the champagne problem, they start to have a CFO. The CFO starts to look into, okay, now we could save 300,000 a year if we just switch to payment provider, because then they start to compare you. These champagne features that you said that do not matter for the early stage founder when you onboarded them, they start to matter now because now they do start to care about this unit efficiency and all the additional value that you get for them. And it's not about anymore the integration pain that we had. So structuring your product in a way that you can actually onboard as an early stage or a smaller team with that grows with you as you go means this is this magical expansion revenue. And so many companies are getting this wrong because they still think in their market as two separate kind of entities. This is a difficult stretch to get right. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways we're thinking about it is because we want simplicity, rather than changing the price point at the low end, which we could do, we could take a big hit on margin just to get people on board. What we're trying to do is add more value. So we've just run an AI launchpad. We've had 65 AI startups on our launchpad where we've given them loads of extra in terms of cash and in terms of funding and in terms of, from partners as well as from ourselves, as well as a whole bunch of partner discounts in order to help them get started fast. And it's given us, we've had such good engagement and response from it. And that's one of the ways of helping people make that decision early where the pain only comes down the line. So yeah, that's the way we're thinking about it rather than kind of creating a different price point. Because our price is a take rate, it scales with them anyway, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to go and upsell somebody. Whereas if someone's charging a SaaS license, there's just a different mechanic.
I really, really like this. And I also remember in one of my first startups where I was running a retail business, my problem was not the rate that I had to pay, like the 3.5% on every transaction. It was just like, I just need to be able to accept American Express because I have a lot of customers that are coming in and they're annoying me about it.
Exactly.
So let me just get set up with something. But as you scale, you have your first million of revenue, then things start to look a little bit different. And you're only going to stay if it actually works out at scale. That's really cool. So You mentioned something that I would love to look into. I don't know whether you have more details on it, but you said you had you were doing a willingness to pay study.
Yep.
Now, The way that I was taught to approach the topic of pricing was these classical methods of Van Westendorp price analysis and some other funny frameworks.
Mhm.
How do you approach this willingness to pay? So let's say you have someone that says like, hey, Andrew, explain to me while we're in this elevator,
Mhm. Mhm.
explain to me how we figure out what the willingness to pay is. How stable does the company need to be? How much does the product need to be figured out? Like, how do you approach this in the first place? How do we set our price point correct?
So this is one of those classic areas that you've got to cuddle with the chaos because it's not easy, particularly in the early stage. And the problem is, because it's not easy, people just go and find a competitor and copy their pricing and raise it $1 a few or reduce it $1 a few. And it's
Yeah.
such a cop-out. So the way of doing this is to go to your target customers and ask them a series of questions about the different features, the different benefits you offer. And the question should be something like this. What would be the lowest price point at which you would think that this no longer has any value for you because it just seems so cheap it can't work? And what is the highest point you would pay for this product before it just gets ruled out by someone in your team as being too expensive? So now you've got a band from that customer, and you do that 20 times, 30 times from similar type personas, not just on the overall product, but on the various different points of value that you might think about packaging from. Those two questions start to give you bands across your different feature sets that then give you some information to A, set a price point, but B, think about how you separate these bits of value into a set of packages. So when we're talking about pricing, it's not just pricing, it's packaging as well. Is this freemium or is it free trial or is it reverse trial? Is it one product or two products or three products plus an add-on? We're seeing right now, as SaaS matures, it used to be good, better, best, a three-step kind of package. Whereas right now, most SaaS businesses, as they get to a point of scale, are experimenting with 5 or 6 or 7 different packages, so they have multiple monetization pathways.
That's very interesting as well to me. Like I'm writing an article right now on freemiums trials and interactive demos, and it was quite funny because I was trying to also look for good examples of companies.
Mhm.
And the more mature these businesses go, and there is a connection to the pricing in a second, but
Mhm. Mhm.
the more you go into a mature business, even Microsoft, even like the biggest companies, they have some kind of freemium version of everything that they do. And this is funny because I thought about it. I was trying to come up with good examples for pure trial businesses, like just like sign up for like 7 days, 14 days, and then do something with it, right?
Mhm.
Most of these companies, as they mature, they also start to add in now some kind of version of freemium. So they are not losing out on the people that are being lost by this friction through going through the trial or whatever the pricing is, because they still realize that even having someone on the freemium plan where you technically charge nothing is still worth it because they act as sales extensions to your arm. Because if they like your product, then they can potentially attract someone that is willing to pay. But getting this initial price point right seems to me quite interesting. So
Mhm.
the questions that you mentioned in order to figure out kind of like the sensitivity, it seems to be relatively simple. What is the correct stage for a company to do this? When you have 20, 30 paying customers, like what would you suggest?
The answer to that probably depends on ACV and the segment you're selling into and how competitive it is. But I think, the earlier you can do this, the better. And so, the companies we see, come out with compelling initial pricing strategies have done this, at the same point as winning their first 50 customers if they're at a reasonably low price point. So it's super early. It's part of their customer discovery. It's customer discovery, not just about the product and what value it delivers, but also the price point you're willing to pay. And, I was super immature about this when I was building Ideo, the personalization business. Like we had no idea. And we were fluctuating. I can remember one point we were onboarding customers at 3K a year at the same time as 250K a year for the same thing. Like genuinely no difference, maybe a little bit of volume difference, but at our margins, that made no change. So, I think one thing that's really exciting here is that this narrative and, yourself and others speaking about this is helping everybody raise their level of maturity to think about it earlier. Because there are really 3 things you can do to drive growth, right? There's better acquisition, there's better retention, and there's better monetization. And when we do a study, and this was kind of the thinking behind Price Intelligently initially, when we did a study of those 3, and if you incremented each one of them by 1%, what was the effect on your core business?
Yeah.
Acquisition made about a 3% difference, 1% increase. Retention made about 9% difference. Monetization made about 15 or 16% difference to your growth in revenue. So it was the lever that was largely unpulled, but had outsized impact because it affects all of your current customers as well as every single one you go to acquire in the future.
Let me repeat this back to you just so I understand, just to make sure that I understand it correctly, because this lines up with what I also see in advising a lot. So what you're saying is that from the current company motions that we have in the markets,
Mhm.
the most unoptimized one is what you
Yep.
said is monetization, then we have retention, then we have an acquisition. Is that correct?
Yep. So all of us will have people full-time paid doing sales work. All of
Yeah.
us will have people full-time paid doing retention work. So few companies have someone who's got the job of actually doing anything to do with pricing. It probably sits with a PMM who's maybe not done it before, and they're coming up with a bunch of competitor analysis in order to try and raise something. Because it's tough. We don't want to piss people off. We don't want to get it wrong. It has outsized impacts. And the other thing we see in our data that's so interesting here, and I love this, is those that make quarterly changes have 82% higher ARPU growth relative to those who haven't touched it in a year. So that's not even whether it's a good change or not. It's just being committed to change. So
Yeah.
if you change things regularly, then you learn and then you can get things right. It's just being willing to make that first step.
I want to just reemphasize this. You should not be afraid of experimenting around pricing, specifically if you're in a down market segment. There's a lot of friction usually coming in with like, yeah, but what if we then have multiple people on different price plans and all that kind of stuff? Doesn't matter. You're going to figure it out. Look, if nobody is jumping on your offer change, then you have less problems to deal with anyways. It's another champagne problem in some ways.
Yep.
So I can totally get this. So really just want like 1 second going back to what you said. So we have acquisition, retention, and then monetization in terms of with the least efficiency first. And I love this so much because I've been talking about this quite a lot. If we look at the amount of material that is out there to how to run a business, we have this very tunnel vision focused set of mind where we think about acquisition a lot. Why do we think about acquisition a lot? And there's a lot of material out there also where you can learn on how do you structure a pricing page, which is, in my opinion, unless, I'm not talking about the final price. I'm talking about how do you visualize your offer towards the market. There's a lot of material out there because you can literally go to every company's website and see how their onboarding flow works. You can test this in like 5 to 10 minutes. But retention, how to get the product right, is actually requiring a lot more work. And there's not that much material out there on how to create a great product, which we're trying to do essentially with product-led growth. And then monetization is even harder because it depends on the other two.
Yep.
And that's why a lot of people are just not touching it, because I still maintain the thought, I don't know how you're structured right now as well, but like I still maintain the thought that growth teams and product teams need to wise up a lot when it comes to monetization. And it should not be driven by just sales, like where you actually put this price point, or by, I don't know whether, I don't know who sets this in other companies. I just don't know. I always put it to the growth teams for sure.
Yeah.
Usually leadership, right? Like leadership is just like defining it. Yeah, let's just raise the price by $2, Andrew, tomorrow.
Yeah. Totally. And that, again, has so many changes with sales compensation and marketing compensation planning, with communication with existing customer cohorts. There's so much complexity behind there, which is one of the reasons that people just don't like to touch this. What I'm really delighted to see is more and more people building what we call a pricing committee. So it's just a group of 2 or 3 people who every single quarter have a responsibility to propose a set of pricing changes and packaging changes for that quarter. And as I said, it doesn't have to be pricing. It could be a new packaging experiment. So one of the things that we see is add-ons. So separating out a portion of your value and adding it as an add-on, charging for it separately, boosts expansion revenue by about 28 or 30%. So, I can remember doing this back in the IDEO days. We suddenly realized we were selling into banks and they wanted us to charge them for onboarding support because they didn't believe that it was going to happen otherwise. They were used to buying $1 million contracts from big tech companies. They were working with us, and our actual ability to close those deals went up when we charged them 20, 30 grand worth of implementation, because now they believed, their procurement team believed we could actually deliver what we said. So thinking about add-ons, and then multi-product correlates with about a 50% faster growth rate. So it's thinking about those packages, how not at the very beginning stages, because you want simplicity, but as you go through 5, 10, 15 million of ARR, thinking how you've got multiple values. And when we think about add-ons, the real simple rule of thumb here is what is in your product that is used by less than 30 or 40% of your customers, but they have a high willingness to pay. So that's where implementation or single sign-on or faster support, all of those things. Normally, there's a set of your customers that are willing to pay an outsized amount for that extra.
Yeah, I really, really like this. And this is, I think, a big thinking shift that you also need to do when you are advising or like talking into sales-led growth companies, because it's very unintuitive to them that expansion revenue, it might actually be the majority of your revenue if you're structuring it correct. Because what is a freemium in the end? I try to onboard you with usage. What is the trial? I try to onboard you now with payment. It doesn't need to be high. I just want you to pay something. So your payment information is in it, specifically also for a business like yours. It doesn't matter whether you charge me for 100 transactions or 10,000. Once it's in, right? And then it scales really conveniently. And I really, really love this on how to intently plan for this cross-selling and upselling revenue. Do you have any thoughts on how to sell this or like how to structure this as well? I'm sure you also have a sales department at Paddle. When we talk about sales incentivization in regards to, okay, you have a product that is slowly ramping up through expansion. And now we have to tell salespeople as well in the company that, hey, we're not trying to close the customer necessarily just like we're trying to negotiate. Oh, we try to get a higher rate from them, take rate, everything is fixed. How do you get sales on board in your mind to be okay with this? I have a take on this, of course, but like I would love to hear it from you.
So the much more complicated environment I used to be in at Optimizely, formed by 5 or 6 acquisitions, we had, I think, 27 different core products we were selling into any given buyer. And so there, to your point, there were massive upsell pathways from whether you'd come in from traditional, maybe MVT experimentation on the website from Optimizely, or whether you bought the core kind of .NET CMS for a lot of money and now needed to add things on top, all of these different pathways. So the first thing we did was split it down into, I think it was 6 solution groups. So groups of solutions that worked for specific types of customers where we knew where they'd start and where they'd go to and why they would get to that point, why it would deliver value for the customer. And then once you've got those solution groups, you're not trying to sell everything to every customer. You're trying to sell a subset of your products to every customer based on what you think is the maturity curve for them. And then, yes, to your point on sales incentivization, it's so key to not trip things up by making sure that salespeople have the wrong motivation. So in this case, it's probably important, those entry products, that they have very, very high comp around them because they're the gateway into lots of other further monetization. And so you want to make sure the reps are incentivized to get people on board into that first step. But as you say, there's probably a farming as well as hunting type commission model over the course of the next couple of years to make sure that those upsells are credited to the people who are going and opening the door. So yeah, it's a deeply complicated subject. But the main thing is, when you look at, I love just talking to reps about this because they are the people who dive in and try and work out the comp model from their own lens.
Exactly.
Most businesses have been there's been one rep who kills it every year, and they kill it because they go and take away the compensation planning doc. They read it, they make red notes on every bit that they can understand how they can drive their comp plan. And of course they should, right? That's their job, is to drive their comp plan. And so, if you go and talk to those reps and try to understand the things that are misaligned in the comp plan, that can usually be a really good way of kind of isolating those problems before they come to your entire team.
I love this so much. And I think I still have maintained this belief for quite a long time without changing it. I think we do not spend enough time on designing great goals that are designed for being taken apart. And then if you start to kind of abuse them, they're really good for the business. And this is specifically true for sales. When I was an executive, I spent not enough time. You can never spend enough time on actual goal setting because it is annoying as hell, right? Like you want to get to work, you want to do something about this, but like really working out this particular comp plan where someone takes out the pen and starts to calculate. So what if I do this? Do I get a little bit more over here? And this is exactly what you want. And it's still, I also go along with Mark Roberge, who also says all the time, like, look, we have not found a method yet to work with sales that is not comp incentivized. So at scale, at least, right? If we do that, then at least let's set the goals right. And I think the same goes for marketing and product. And also would love to hear from you about marketing. I just want to say one anecdote that I always bring to salespeople, which they usually tend to understand. We have in retail, when I was running my retail business, we had a concept which is called a loss leader. It's where you just bring in people to your business with an item that is so low priced that you might even have a loss from selling it. But we know that people who are coming in for this particular item are then buying more as they go through the store or whatever it is. And this is the same kind of principle. It's just really hard because the timeline, like the shop visit, is just it extends, right? Like you're not coming into the shop and then you use the product, you are all the time in the product. And that's a concept that is a bit hard to wrap around. How do you think about this from the perspective of marketing? Because this is always a hot topic as well. So I'm one of these people that goes around and says, like, okay, marketing should deliver quality leads instead of quantity leads.
Mhm.
How does this tie in with this entire story? So you said, like, okay, we figured out monetization. Let's say we figured out retention and acquisitions, and the salespeople are also happy. How do we structure good goals for marketing as a CMO as well that tie into this entire model?
So we definitely haven't got it right yet. We're just in planning right now for 2024. I can tell you what's wrong right now and what we're trying to do to fix it.
Yeah, let's go with that.
So right now, a bunch of my DG team are goaled and motivated around opening sales opportunities. So has to have buy-in from sales, very classic model, has to have buy-in from sales. We have a very, very strong model of how highly they convert. And so it's not about leads, it's about actual accounts with the right decision maker that have gone through some basic sales qualification. That bit really works. What doesn't work is our self-serve has been growing and growing and growing. And there's a huge amount of our marketing program spend, our events, our content that directly drive self-serve revenue. And we've not had any goal or any comp associated with it. It's just been a really nice and increasingly nice surprise at the end of every quarter what all of our resources delivered. So what we're doing as we go into next year is in our sales as well as marketing philosophies for compensation is trying to make sure that actually as a business, we don't care how people start working with us, whether it's self-serve or sales assisted. And obviously, self-serve is much, much more efficient for us as a business. And now we've set the groundwork in terms of a much better process, much better developer experience, much better solution support if it's needed. And so what we're trying to do there is make sure that no one has an incentive to get on a call or open an opportunity in Salesforce as a manual task, which currently there is that incentive structure, that misaligned incentive. So we're trying to remove that to make sure that everybody wins when the business wins, which is when the customer wins, when they get on board fast and they get value fast.
Does that mean you're thinking about giving incentivization to people in marketing? I hope they're not listening to this podcast, because if you say yes, then you have to pay up.
They all listen to this, so they will absolutely. I'll have to be speaking very, very carefully. So this is about making sure that all of the work that we do that goes and ends up in self-serve go lives is attributed, measured, attributed, and also we've got a way of compensating that. But I want to make sure that we're not spending, a month of every quarter having a fight over attribution and having a fight over, goaling, because that just adds weight into our business. So this is much more around top line. By working with product and by working with sales, which are our solutions team, are we seeing that number improve versus our goals? And if we are, then that absolutely should contribute to the variable portion of marketing's goal.
Yeah, I think this attribution fight that you just mentioned is just detrimental to the company. Yeah. I still try to find also a good solution, because why are we doing this attribution? Well, it helps us for reporting and also getting some really good idea on how the business runs. The problem is at scale, it really starts to actually detriment. The fact that you're doing it is actually detrimenting the experience for the customer. So what usually happens is that sales is holding on to leads that they should actually pass back to the product, like into the self-serve funnel, because they know they're going to make money from it and so forth. Mm-hmm. I also have not found the perfect solution for it, but I think a very important step for business leaders is also like to be aware that, look, in the center, it's really the customer, and you do not know sometimes. You have to give up some control. Where they start, where they end up. Some of them are coming in through marketing, some of them are coming in from sales, some of them are coming in from product, and then they just bounce around. Yeah. So let me just ask you a question then in regards to marketing. Where does marketing end, specifically at Paddle, in regards to, like, where do you draw the line between classical marketing and where does product start, for a lack of better word? I'm against the siloing, but I would like to understand, where do you think it actually stops?
So genuinely, it never stops. Because of our business model, where if they grow faster, then we immediately see a benefit in terms of the take rate. Marketing should be involved in helping all of our customers grow faster. So a bunch of our education, a bunch of our content, a bunch of our courses, they're actually focused on our customers and helping them grow faster. So that AI Launchpad I mentioned, yes, there was an acquisition piece of that, but there were all already existing Paddle customers who we invited onto that program. And we have seen insane growth over the last 3-4 months as they've taken on our learnings about pricing, packaging, as we've brought on partners to talk about ecosystem and partner and channel development. We're seeing them grow, and then that returns back to us. So genuinely, it's not a fake answer. Marketing should be involved the entire way through that life cycle, making sure that our best customers are growing fast.
So I think the biggest difference that I hear you say is that you really take care also of your existing customers. It's not just about generating new leads, new MQLs. It's really about also nurturing that and maybe also activating, right? So like dormant customers or like those that could do more. And I think that's a very interesting thing. Yeah.
And there's a couple of things that go into that. The first one is that I just don't think we can get away from face-to-face relationship building makes a big difference. So we've got customers all across the world. And it means we have to travel a lot. In the last few months, I've been in Bucharest, I've been in Cluj, I've been in Tel Aviv, I've been in Barcelona, in Amsterdam, in Hamburg, wherever it might be, because in every one of those cities, there will be Paddle customers as well as prospects. And just being face-to-face to people means that now they've got an escalation path to me if there's something that's going wrong. Means if they need a capital intro or a bit of learning on something that I can go and try and find that for them. And so first thing is that face-to-face is just so important. The second piece, yes, on that ability to constantly make friends and kind of incent growth in our larger customers, because we've got access to this data set, one of the things we're trying to do but need to get better at is making sure our customers get our best data. So it's so easy to be pushing our best content, our best thought leadership, our best analysis towards the top of the funnel in acquisition. Whereas really, it should be our customers that get that first. It should be our customers who get the white glove service when we're interpreting that for them.
No. So let's say we had to summarize the best kind of data that you have also for these customers, or like, I don't know whether you were also talking about individual customer insights or like, like just generalized knowledge.
Yep.
And so we've determined already that the experimenting around monetization is very important. Okay, I got that. But now, so what other things should I, maybe also in regards to the benchmark that you did with OpenView, what are the things that are optimizable? Let's talk about it about this way. So like, what are the things that people really need to be aware of if they're leading a company right now?
Yeah, so let's dive into a few, and then you can double click on any of those that are interesting. So firstly, we've talked about packaging and we've talked about pricing. We haven't talked actually that much about payments. So we need to think about willingness to pay in every region and adjusting prices based on local willingness to pay, adjusting payment methods and currency based on each region. So we see that if you offer multiple currencies on your pricing page, it correlates with significantly faster growth. We see US businesses generally use a credit card payment and bank transfer, whereas China wants Alipay, Netherlands wants Ideal, Germany wants PayPal, and we see a 21% faster growth correlating with adding just one extra payment method. And so we think about regional payment acceptance. So yeah, pricing, packaging, and payments, making sure all three of those are covered. And then, and we've got some of that data in the OpenView report, then there's a few other things. We saw some very interesting stats around vertical versus horizontal SaaS. Vertical SaaS is correlated with much faster growth right now than horizontal SaaS. And I think that's partly towards horizontal SaaS obviously often takes a huge amount more capital to reach a much larger audience. It's often associated with brand plays and community plays that take a while to go and execute. And so vertical SaaS, where you know exactly who's your buyer. And then the second thing is you're able to build multi-product strategies around a single buyer use case in a more compelling way and in a more cost-effective way than you are when you're serving a huge audience. So that's the second thing that's interesting. The third thing that's interesting, and we said at the beginning we weren't going to deep dive on this because everyone's sprinkling AI pixie dust on everything they do, but we saw a positive correlation for those who had built, shipped, and are monetizing AI features. And we saw a negative correlation for people who had just done something with AI but were not monetizing it. So if your proposition now has some form of AI, but it's not got a new monetization associated with it, it actually negatively correlated with growth. Whereas, Intercom is a great example. They're actually a pricing customer of ours. They have these AI-based resolution fees. And so if they resolve the customer issue using AI, you pay an extra bump. And so those are the things that correlate well with growth.
That's really, really interesting. I have too many things to double click on. So let's just start with one of them. So when you said vertical SaaS versus horizontal SaaS, like if we had to simplify what we're saying here is that like if you niche down into a very specific place versus going very, very broad, this is something that is very mirrored in a survey that I'm doing right now with Pocus and OpenView and KeyPlay, where we just ask also like, so what is on top of your mind? Like, as a GTM leader, what do you want to do? And to no surprise, almost everyone says that they want to get higher ACV. So we want to make more money per individual account that we have. And that usually means that you're becoming more vertical because you need to kind of get into these niche solutions. And why is that the case? Because with AI, you can build much, much faster something, which means you need to become a specialist. So it's not that easy to copy this little something just as kind of fast. But now your TAM is starting to shrink, right? So like the total addressable market is starting to become lower. Does this mean, and this is a completely different direction now, does this mean also in your estimation that the time for VC funding in the way that we fund businesses and also acquire capital is changing fundamentally, because I do think so. I was making this prediction about a year ago where I said, like, I think that we see a new advent of companies that will top out on a specific size and they make good money for their founders, but they're not going to be unicorns anymore. It's maybe going to be the $100 million business that are you just happy to run, and it's going to be bootstrapped as well. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, loads. I firstly 100% agree. And I think the availability of different forms of capital, revenue-based financing, as well as more bootstrappers, I think is just super interesting to see. Because the fundamental point here is that an outcome is only as good or bad as the capital you've raised to go and get that outcome. So a $10 million outcome can be amazing and life-changing as an exit for a founder who is bootstrapped from the ground up, or as one or two friends and family that put seed money in. Whereas the same exit would be devastating for the funds invested as well as the founders if there were, an exafat of capitals invested. So I think the one thing here is to, yes, deeply understand your go-to-market in terms of your serviceable market you're going to reach and how much you can charge from each one. That bottoms-up calculation, I love seeing that bottoms-up calculation when I look at pitch decks. It's like there are 200 companies we can go and win. We can charge $100,000 from each of them per year. Therefore, this is our serviceable market and how we're going to go and win it. That bottoms-up means that you can then work out capital and how much you should raise and where you should raise it from to be aligned with that strategy. So yeah, 100% agreed. The thing I do find still really troubling, particularly when VC money, when equity money is in businesses, is the disconnect from the $1 billion or $10 billion or $100 billion total addressable market number that's quoted in the pitch deck.
Yeah.
And then when you go and deal with the actual sales team or the product team and the marketing team who are wrestling with that, the much, much smaller number that's the serviceable or the serviceable attainable market. And I think people are starting to see this, but I still see a big disconnect where there's a big number, a small number, and people don't understand the difference.
Yeah, I think, like also creating the past there means that you're also talking about a story of about 5 to 10 years in the best case, which is very difficult right now, because although we all know and agree that AI is going to be let's go into the AI discussion then, right? So we all know that AI is going to dominate the world. Of course, it will. The problem is you still don't know which companies will be part of this. So making now an investment that goes, who can say who in 5 years will have, is ChatGPT still going to be around? No, we don't know. We know that there's some language models going to be around and people will use them. That's all clear. But in terms of an investment, this starts to become really difficult. So the length of these deals to get to this 1 billion that everybody magically talks about is quite problematic in itself. And the reason why I was talking to you about this is that, so Loom announced relatively recently that they were acquired by Atlassian. And if you think about it, oh my God, they got sold for like 975 million, I think. Amazing, right? Like everything is amazing. But if you think about okay, so how much do the individual founders get? For this, and how much money that was actually raised? It was an okay exit. It was a good exit, but it was not like, boom, now we're all rich. Because this was a business also and Loom is one of the much more successful businesses that we have actually in the industry. It is interesting how we tend to take these singular stories and then we take them as blueprints for every company. What I see happening right now is that this new narrative of bootstrapped or smaller funding deals, much less per round you actually raise, is starting to get a very, very tight grip now in the community. Companies like 37 Signals as well are also leading the charge. Of course, it's nice to be bootstrapped, but it's also harder. But your success rate is also bigger once you get over a specific stage. So I find this very, very interesting. And
there's a bit of a bifurcation, I think, happening. So there's, whereas a standard seed deal or a standard Series A deal 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you could generally put your finger on what valuation they might be seeing, what growth rate they might be seeing. Now I see people take one of two different options. There's those who have genuine deep tech, genuine protectable IP, who are raising significant amounts at very high valuations and have that kind of go big or go home strategy. And then there's lots and lots of others who have learnt from the pain of a previous founding experience or seeing the narrative on the challenges over valuations being crushed and are therefore choosing to raise much, much lower rounds, smaller rounds at earlier stages. So I do think that's super interesting. And, very transparently, right? The next business I build, I would delay raising VC as long as I possibly could until I really knew that that was now pouring oil on a bonfire that had already been lit. Like we had the fundamental assumptions now built, and this was now about market domination and market growth versus competitors over a time frame, rather than just the standard way to go and build the business.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I think you need to get some kind of motion going with the funds that you have. Because if you just raise to get your business going in the first place, you're going to be exactly in the same problem again. Because then you have expectations that you need to also grow at a specific rate. Look, I don't know about you, but like it still takes me, with all my experience, 2 years to even have a chance of finding product market fit from the initial idea to getting something done. That time has never changed. I never was lucky and like, oh, we have an idea. And then 3 months later, oh, shit, now we're just making so much money. It just doesn't
Yeah,
happen, right? It takes time
takes
because you're
time.
competing with other people around the same markets. And yeah,
There's something really interesting here in the time it takes, but also in the kind of what success looks like, that I've had to have conversations with myself and with key team members at different points on different journeys of going for a coffee, again, maybe with myself or maybe with a team member who's raised it, and rationally looking at this problem of comparison. I'm a rubbish swimmer, but when I go swimming at the swimming pool, if I'm constantly looking at the person next to me who's way faster, way fitter, and is able to do twice the amount of laps than I can do, I don't swim very far. I get bored very easily. I get fed up very easily, and I go out and have a burger. Now, if I keep my head down and I'm just swimming myself in my own
yeah,
world, in my own head, I can keep going for much longer because now I'm racing against myself, not other people. And I strongly feel that there is, the rise of the press and rise of kind of people being transparent, often on very inflated numbers, has a real negative consequence on people's psyches, on people's own expectations. And we have to deal with that and talk about that, because I'd much rather be in a business where it takes longer than I expected and the outcome isn't quite as big as I expected, but I enjoyed the journey and it was aligned with a realistic set of expectations, rather than
yeah.
constantly looking over my shoulder at people who are killing it around the industry.
I really, really like this. I think a conversation that I have quite often is like, who are our competitors? And you see this also in the minds of people on, so who are our competitors? Oh, well, it's always people who build kind of the same, because we were raised with like comparing ourselves to others exactly in the way that you said, right? Like who's further along on the line? And with
Mhm,
whom can you compare yourself the best? With competitors who are building the same kind of software.
mhm,
Well, it turns out in product-led growth, you can actually let go of this, because what you should be comparing yourself with, specifically if you're a greenfield solution, like you give someone a new solution for something where they did not have a solution in place first. You're not competing against the same providers. You're competing against what they would have done if you
mhm,
were not around. And
mhm,
that's what you have to compete yourself with,
mhm,
and
mhm,
not the other solutions. That's just the optimal world and where you could go in the future, but you still matter for the individual customer. They don't care whether you're a little bit better than PayPal or a little bit better than this particular payment provider, whether you drive a Tesla. They don't care. All they care about is whether what you have is better what they do right now. And that might not be actually an actual solution, because you're always competing against something. And this truth has been as old as, I don't know, ceramic. I'm just like putting in a word that I feel like is old.
100%. And marketing against the status quo is an art form in itself, right? Because it means you have to understand the status quo. Now, I can remember, building IDEO, we were selling into very, very large scaled enterprises. Honestly, it took me years to understand the status quo because their jobs were just in way more complicated environments than I'd ever been in way larger businesses, 100,
No.
200,000 person businesses. And so the status quo, it's only when you've spent real time with those individuals and those around that buying committee that you can understand what the status quo is to go and market against it.
No. Yeah, I think that is very true. And we usually overestimate on how much we understand our markets, because we tend to think in competitors rather than, in the
Mhm,
people that we have. Yeah, it sounds a little bit hippie, but like that's just what it is, right? Like you can
mhm,
take literally the same product, put two
mhm,
brands on it, and you have a completely different distribution model just based on the brands that these people have been acquiring. I mean, at Small PDF, we were marketing very, very personal, like
mhm,
we were never the enterprise brand. So even though you have the same exact product as some other bigger competitors like Foxit and so forth, it changes everything.
yeah,
It changes how you monetize, it changes how you do acquisition, it changes how you do marketing in the end again. And
mhm,
that's why you cannot just take their pricing page, copy it, and then putting it on your stuff. So stop comparing yourself, just focus on the customers, I think is the message here. Unfortunately, we did not touch on everything that I wanted to touch on, but I think there were some really great insights. Let me just go to the final two questions. You, as someone that has already quite the exposure also with different companies. You've been in this business also longer than me. I think we both have gray hairs coming out of our head because of this business. Are there still some insecurities as a senior leader that you are also dealing with where you feel like, hey, I wish, or like I'm in the process of getting over it? I'm talking a lot about imposter syndrome. It strikes me on the wrong days, especially when I didn't have enough sleep. And recently I told someone the story that, funny enough, like depending on how I feel in a day, I could look at the same balance sheet. And on one day it looks like, oh my God, this company is crashing. And on the other day it looks like, this looks pretty good. And this gives me a little bit of worry in my mind. Is there anything like this where you just say like, yeah, I'm still trying to improve?
100%. Firstly, I go back to my very first entrance into the world of work as a massive benefit and learning here. So we'll talk about current insecurities in a moment, but it really helped me. I was hired by Deloitte Consulting as one of 15 people in the UK to be a scholar. So they had a scholarship program. They paid through university for us. It was a really fantastic program. But you turned up at the London office as a 17-year-old kid, and then they threw you out on audit processes and consulting processes with massive clients. And I would literally walk into a boardroom with a CFO of a big company and not have a clue what even the questions I was asking them meant. And then would have to walk out an hour later with answers to all of those questions. And there were many times when that was just almost debilitating in how hard it was and how much risk there was associated with getting it wrong. And of course, you make a bunch of mistakes, but that's built into their model. What's really interesting is that it gave me such a resilience to those situations where I felt like I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And I almost, whether it's my psyche is warped, I almost feel that if I'm not doing things where I feel a bit out of my comfort zone, then I don't feel I'm learning and I don't feel like I'm slightly on that edge. And so firstly, that initial process was so helpful. And I really encourage people who are entering the world of work to find ways of saying yes to things that are so outside of their comfort zone. Because either you manage to get through it and it works, or you manage to get through it and it doesn't work, and you learn some life skills about how to manage it. So I'm really grateful. Even back at school, my English teacher used to have this thing called oral reports, where once every month, every single student used to get up and give a 10-minute presentation in front of the class on a topic of their choice. And just being pushed to do that type of thing at an early age really, really helped me. So I think those things have given me a bit of an unfair advantage on this. But in terms of current, insecurities, imposter syndrome, one thing that I learned from the IDEO journey, we made so many mistakes, and we could dive into challenges over employee theft, challenges over running out of money, challenges over people on our cap table fighting against each other and trying to kill the company, loads of different things. But what it taught me is that you do have to enjoy the journey, and that the things that go really well, they probably aren't as awesome as it seems in that moment. And the things that are awful, they probably aren't as bad as it seems in that moment. And life comes when you just keep on walking and just are able to not take the kind of the high points and the low points as definitional to your behavior and to your emotions, and just allow yourself to wait in the middle a bit more. And that might sound really boring, but I think it's that level of consistency that helps over the long time.
I think you're absolutely on the money. And ironically, I would just want to add one thing to this in terms of what we are afraid of as people, I think, is that we appear as not competent in the eyes of others.
Yeah.
And ironically, if you look, I don't know about you, but if I think about the most confident people that I know in my kind of circles, people that really have their stuff together, none of them are afraid of speaking up inside of a meeting when there's a term falling that absolutely guaranteed nobody understands in the entire meeting.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you actually explain to me what this is about? And then everybody in the meeting is like, oh, I'm so glad he did that or she did that.
Totally.
And it goes exactly into what you said, right? You cannot just be publicly uncomfortable about these things, because it also gives the right to others.
Yeah.
It's something that I had to learn, because if I do it as an executive, then they are also not afraid of asking questions afterwards.
Yeah.
Because what you do is going to be mirrored all the way down. Now, are there any trends that you are betting on in the industry, at work, private, whatever, that you feel like are coming up in the next years? Where should we invest, Andrew? And we're not giving stock tips, of course, or financial advice, but what is going to happen in the world that you're betting on that is maybe a little bit insightful?
I'm not sure it's insightful. There's a few things. There's a few things, but they all come back to, there was an earnings report that Jeff Bezos gave maybe 10 years ago, where he was asked the innovation budget of Amazon, where do you go and place that on new trends? What are the new things you're going to bet on? And he said, look, there are lots of new things happening, but fundamentally, I'm going to be betting on the things that will always stay true for our customers. They are always going to want things faster, and they're always going to want things cheaper. So 100% of our innovation budget is working on things that get people things cheaper and faster. So for me, like, I much rather take that perspective where, I wasn't early on any of the trends. I wasn't early on Web3. I wasn't early on AI. I wasn't early on, I still don't understand either of those terms really. And so, I'm not the one to ask on the cusp trends that are about to take off. What I do think, and it's a marketing lesson as much as a life lesson, is that us as people, yes, our psyche changes based on the technology we use. Our behaviors change over time with social change, but we have a whole bunch of needs that are going to stay the same until the end of time. And so meeting those is really important. And so when I think about the trends I'm betting on, it's about thinking, in marketing, it's about, are we meeting people face to face and genuinely building trust? Is every interaction with our business, whether digital or physical, actually helping people learn something new, deliver value, and see us in a better frame of mind than when they came in? There's a whole bunch of just real basics we have to get back to there. And I believe that, relationships as well as business as well as personal life are based on trust. And trust is something that happens when you compound multiple interactions that are positive over time with a lack of self-interest. And so, those are the things I think about rather than the next new trend and trying to make sure I'm early in the stock picks.
I think I could not agree more with this, especially now because we are getting so efficient with the digital channels, like the unpersonal channels. We're starting to optimize them. We have machine learning to optimize them. That means by definition that there's less money to get there as well, or like less value to also create for our customers. And this in-person thing, you said it now twice. You said it now in the trends and you said it also before. I 100% believe in this, and not just from a sales perspective, not just like you go to your clients and then you sell in person. I also think from a marketing's perspective, where you actually create events that are not just about who is presenting, but also who is going to attend these events. If you create communities around topics where if I go there, then my heroes and the people that I appreciate are also there, then you start to create something that is not that copyable. Even if they take the entire speaker and their topics and put them somewhere else, it's not going to be the same experience. And these acquisition channels are incredibly powerful, specifically in B2B. And we could make an entire episode around this. So Andrew, unfortunately, we ran out of time. And unfortunately, you have to come a second or a third time because I really, really enjoyed this. I hope you also had a good time. So how can people find you, and should they find you? And if so, where should they do that?
Come and grab me on LinkedIn, Andrew Davies Paddle on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you there. One of the real privileges of my job is that we believe at Paddle that if the SaaS industry grows faster and if PLG grows faster, then we'll take a piece of that over time. And so a whole bunch of my time could be spent with just jumping in, helping with companies that have got a challenge, or they want to think about their go-to-market plan or their 2024 budget or whatever it might be. So please grab me on LinkedIn, ping me a message if I can help. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be all across Europe next year. We're going to be down probably in APAC as well. I'm hoping to be doing Middle East and Africa, and we'll definitely be in the US. And so, reach out to me if you'd love to be part of one of those dinners we run, and I'd love to meet face to face as well.
That sounds great. So if you're on planet Earth, talk to Andrew. He's going to take your call. And that's it for today. Thank you so much. Baboom.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much for listening to The Producty with Lea. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leatarin.com, which is leahtharin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.